Good evening, everybody. Just got a couple of administrative things to cover on fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and I'm waiting for confirmation. Yes? Please, can all members of the public switch their phones off? All members and members of the public switch their phones off or turn to silent. Come back to that in a minute. For the benefit of the members of the public attending, I would like to explain who everybody is around this table. My name is Councillor Paul Miller, and I am the chairman of this committee. Down to the sides of the table, to my left and right, are councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions on the applications before us this evening. Immediately to my left and right are officers who will be advising councillors. In addition, I would like to explain that the Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be examining the evidence brought before us tonight and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to return to their seats once their presentation is complete, and following any questions from members. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and to keep any comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. I understand that planning can be emotive, and ask that everybody remains polite and professional throughout this evening. Right, proceeding to the agenda. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I've got one notified, and for this evening only, Councillor Leeks is replaced by Councillor Richards. Do I have any others? Councillor Harvey?
Thank you, Chair. I'm replacing Councillor Hood this evening.
You're replacing Councillor Hood. Thank you very much for that. And I trust Councillor Hood is recovering. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest, please, on any items on the agenda. Councillor Jonathan Richards.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have declared interest on the item 1. I am a member of the Borghurst Society, and I understand that they have put in some objections. However, I have not been involved at all in that, and I have no pecuniary or prejudicial interest at all.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mr. Tucker.
Very much like to say ditto, but it would sound a bit rude, I think. But I too am a member of the Borghurst Society, but I have no pecuniary or prejudicial interest in this item.
Thank you for those declarations. Anybody else? Nope. Urgent matters. I've not been notified of any urgent matters. Move on to minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of October 2017. Are they agreed for accuracy? I will sign them then at the end of this meeting. Thank you. Applications for planning permission and public participation. And we move to item number 1, officers.
There is an update paper. There's no public speaking. An amended plan was received today, so there wasn't sufficient time to consider the landscaping proposed. So we're suggesting amending condition 9 on the main printed papers to state that notwithstanding that plan, we still require more detail and information. Since the last committee, there has been 2 additional letters received, which are covered in the update papers with an officer response saying it doesn't change the recommendation. Members visited the site last week on their site viewings.
And because the item was deferred from the last committee, we've now had a chance to visit the site, and we kick off for members anyway, questions, any questions to officers? No questions? Oh, Councillor Richards.
Is that a question or debate? The thing relates to possible entrance of travellers onto the site. I mean, what measures? I mean, it's a rural site, wide open, just a large field, ideal spot where we often find these travellers suddenly appearing. I wonder if there are going to be any preventative measures to stop that happening.
It's just the same as any other rural or non-rural site where travellers choose to set up. We can't control what they would do any more than if it was still remained as an agricultural field with a vehicular access from the public highway.
Yeah, except of course it does have some rather good washing facilities and lavatories and so on. So it's slightly different, I would say.
It's no different from any other camping and caravan site or glamping site. Yeah, I can't see anyone could control how that use would or wouldn't happen on one or any other particular piece of land.
I'm going to interject here, and my question is, depending upon the result of what the committee decides this evening, could we not put an informative in alongside the conditions? I agree with you, we probably couldn't condition anything, but an informative to the applicant, raising the committee's concerns that there's probably a heightened possibility that unauthorised access could be achieved into this particular site, bearing in mind the site is only going to be open, that I was assured by the applicant when we were on site, between the months of April and October, so it's going to be left vacant. I think it was a concern that was I voiced it at the time of the viewing.
Yeah, the business plan states that it's proposed to open from the beginning of March through to the end of October, so it's slightly longer than you were saying. You could put you could put a condition on, say, how do they intend to secure the sites through the months that they're closed, which is, but yeah, more informative to say that as either, but it's a site with a vehicular access to the public highway, so.
Anything else? Questions for officers? Debate? Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I did have some concerns about this, but the applicant has addressed those between last time as sitting here and as doing the viewing the other day. And certainly, seeing the topography, the lie of the land there, the pods sit very low in the landscape, so I see no harm in this, and I recommend it for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, having listened to the contributions of the Borghurst Society last time we met, I do understand that they're concerned about preserving the amenity value of the countryside. However, the proposal is a very modest proposal, in my opinion, for 6 small glamping pods, and it's situated in an isolated part of the field, as we saw when we went on the viewing panel on Friday. I mean, it's not going to be seen unless you're almost on top of it, because it's over the sort of the brow of a hill, really well tucked away. The nearest footpath would not provide a view of the location. The nearest dwelling is about 100 metres distant, and access to the site has been moved to bring greater safety access to the site. Borghurst and Browning Hill is an area that is well worth visiting, in my opinion. I mean, it's a very pleasant area. It's got a lovely church, and the extra accommodation will allow people to do so, and I think it will benefit the area. Visitors will have access to local sites of interest and would have access to nearby hostelries and shops. The traffic movements, I think, are going to be modest. I mean, there's probably only going to be one vehicle per pod. I mean, the pods are only really for 2 people, and that's going to be from Friday through until Sunday, I think, and for the sort of spring and summer months. So, I mean, all in all, I appreciate that there is a concern in the area about access to the site and travellers perhaps, but that site, that field, has already got a big gate into it, which could be opened by anybody with a pair of bolt cutters, I suspect. They could get in there, they could set up a camp. I mean, it's going to be no different then as it is now. So I have no difficulty with this proposal whatsoever. I think that the concerns of the Borkhurst Society, who are a self-selecting group, I have to say, they are not Borkhurst Parish Council. Borkhurst Parish Council didn't have any objections to it. I think their worries basically are overcome with all the conditions that are placed on the site. So I would have no hesitation in recommending this for approval.
Anybody else? Our two speakers, do we have a proposer?
I propose it.
Thank you, Councillor Brown proposes. Councillor Robinson seconding, I presume? Yep. Thank you. On the vote, all those in favour for approval? Thank you very much. That is approved, officers.
The application is approved as written in the main papers and the amendments in the update papers with an informative as discussed.
Thank you. Item number 2, officers.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the erection of a replacement 4-bedroom dwelling following the demolition of the existing bungalow and garage on the site. There's a small update in the paper highlighting the landscape team have provided formal comments to raise no objection, and the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Packman to come up, please? While we're here, does this light preclude anybody seeing this screen behind me? We can switch it off if it's going to make anything clearer on the screen. Otherwise, we'll leave it as is. Bernie, thank you. Mr. Packman, good evening. You have 4 minutes. Silver button on the bottom of the microphone stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the second planning application for a replacement dwelling on this site, the first application being refused due to the size and bulk of the proposals. Since the refusal, we have enjoyed a constructive relationship with the case officer, working hard to amend the scheme to overcome the previous reasons for refusal and the objections raised by local residents. Indeed, the principal objector, who lives at Cottage Farm House, wrote in response to amended plans to confirm that he was pleased with the amendments made. That was recently. During the course of this application, significant amendments have been made, including shrinking the entire site area to exclude the paddock land that you can, or a part of the paddock land that you can see in blue, removal of a proposed garage in its entirety, removal and relocation of windows, incorporation of improved car parking and turning space to the north of the site, and further significant reductions to the height and overall size of the proposal. The height of the proposed dwelling has been a point of contention throughout the proposals, but we have now reached a point where statutory consultees, many local residents and the case officer consider the scheme acceptable. The scheme is now a metre lower than the original application proposed, the previous planning application, bringing it squarely into line with the surrounding building heights. The scheme before you is a much reduced proposal and is now considered by the case officer to represent an acceptable form of development that would have no adverse impacts on the character and quality of the surrounding landscape, the value of designated heritage assets, and the amenities of local residents. Given this, it is hoped that members can now move tonight towards approving this application in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you very much.
Could you turn your microphone off, thanks, because it mutes everybody else out. Thank you very much. And members, any questions for Mr. Packman? No, thank you very much. There are no other speakers notified, so members, questions to officers? None? Debate? Anybody want to talk about the site? We had a good look at it on Friday. Nothing? I will then move the officer's recommendation from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Court. All those in favour? That item is approved. Officers?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, the application is approved subject to the conditions in the main report. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll move on to item number 3, Cobb Cottage. This is the cattery.
This is a planning application for the erection of a cattery and a 1.8 metre high fence following the demolition of outbuildings. There is an update on page 3 of your update papers. Since the papers were printed, an additional letter of objection has been received. The officer response is in the update paper, and it is proposed to amend condition 9 on your main papers to include the wording enter and leave in a forward gear after the word turning. And there's also a requirement, there's an error on the site plan, so a condition requiring an amended site plan that takes into account the requirements of conditions 8 and 9 on the printed papers.
Thank you. And we have got a Councillor Philip Kingston and Councillor David Snook, please. Could you...
Just myself. Philip Kingston.
Good evening to you, and you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Philip Kingston, representing Pembroke Parish Council. What you may not have been made aware of is that the A340 is by the UK Highway Design Standards over capacity with a daily traffic flow in excess of 17,000 vehicles per day. And that if we were to consider a new road, it would either be a wide single or a dual carriageway. Now, a wide single has limited access onto the highway with, at times, grade separated junctions. The application site has limited sight lines on the near side, and the arrangement of the cat pens means that the entrance is restricted. This will not allow vehicles to enter and leave the site at the same time, coupled with limited internal parking for the 6 vehicles stated in the application, means that there will be both internal and external congestion, resulting in potential for an accident. The Parish Council have made an official objection, but this site differs from others, the other 16 catteries within 10-mile radius, where in each case the cat pens are well away from housing and well screened in order to create a tranquil rural environment for the cats to settle in for their stay. The application places the cats' pens close to neighbours and a busy road associated with noise not conducive to a restful stay for the cats, nor the neighbours, with both noise and smells coming from the cats. The applicants state that they have no experience in running a cattery and therefore cannot be certain of the traffic generation which at peak times will exceed their estimate. The proposed development represents an overdevelopment of the site and shall be refused on traffic and highway grounds, as well as potential noise and smell for neighbours, but also because such a business is out of keeping with the housing in the immediate vicinity. The Parish Council did ask for a site visit, at which these observations would have been made clear to Council Committee members. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions for the Parish Councillor? Nope. Councillor Bound.
I mean, we were told on site, I believe, by the applicant that they are going to sort of limit the number of cars that are going to come onto the site at any one time. Does that sort of reassure you at all?
Well, sorry, I've left my microphone on. I apologise. The issue is that the actual site is on a bend immediately after a junction to the right. If you actually exit the site, it is advisable to turn left in the direction of the traffic because of the traffic volumes and leave at speed. It is a very dangerous site. And even if you limit the numbers, you are still going to have a problem.
Any more questions for the Parish Council? Thank you very much. Questions to... Oh, I beg your pardon. We have other people to speak. Mrs. Hale, please. Good evening, Mrs. Hale. It's a button on the bottom of the microphone stand, and you have 4 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, fellow councillors and officers. My husband and I reside at the neighbouring property, Bowbrook, and I wish to make the following statement. I have a number of grounds of objection to the erection of the proposed cattery. The location of the eastern boundary of the proposed pens is only 7 feet away from our kitchen, and our master bedroom is situated above the kitchen. The kitchen is triple aspect, and the bedroom is double aspect. A major concern for us is that our food preparation and cooking area is only 7 feet away from the nearest pens. I submitted a disc which has since been uploaded onto the planning portal detailing the location of every cattery within a 20-mile radius of Cobb Cottage, of which there are 16. 12 of these are within a 10-mile radius of Cobb Cottage. It is important to note that none of these catteries are in such close proximity to neighbouring residential properties. The majority are on much larger sites with easy access. Page 21 of my submission shows the outline in red of the extent of the property Cobb Cottage and its proximity to the neighbouring properties of Bowbrook to the south and Inglenook to the north. Page 22 of my submission shows the outline in red of the proposed location of the 20 cat pens in relation to the property Bowbrook. Indeed, the cat pens would be in closer proximity to our property than they would be to Cobb Cottage. The whole of the site of Cobb Cottage is adjacent to the front garden of Bowbrook. There is no rear garden. All of the available ground is to the south and east of the property. The overall area of the Cobb Cottage site is extremely limited and thus would afford very restricted space for vehicles to manoeuvre in order to exit the site in forward motion onto the busy A340. In practice, visitors not familiar with the road would attempt to reverse out, a highly dangerous manoeuvre. From the site entrance, there is only some 50 feet to the north before the bend in the road known as Court Corner. Traffic heading south from Court Corner regularly exceeds the 40-mile-per-hour speed limit. I refute the claim made by the applicant in their design and access statement that the access benefits from excellent visibility both north and south for safe entry and exit from the site. The applicant also states that traffic generation will be limited to 3 movements per day. I find this a gross underestimate given that the cattery will have the capacity to house up to 40 cats. The applicant further states that 20 pens would be the initial requirement, increasing to 25 pens once the business is established. I'm incredulous to comprehend how you, as the planning authority, could allow my family to be subjected to upwards of 50 cats in such close proximity to our dwelling. Not only that, the increased traffic movements that such an increase would generate. I am also at a loss to understand how your senior environmental officer can conclude that the proposed design and use of a cattery at this location is unlikely to result in an adverse impact on the amenity of existing dwellings in the vicinity.
You have just under a minute.
The planning officer's report states that the structure is 2.2 metres high, increasing to 2.5 metres high to the northeast. The design and access statement refers to the boundary of the business being shielded by a close-board timber fence 1.8 metres high. No mention is made of any other screening to the rear of the pens. To summarise, I submit that the whole application is 1. Total overdevelopment of the site. 2. Involves change of use from residential to business. 3. Is incompatible and unacceptable use of the site. The Feline Advisory Bureau states that where cats are well housed and content, there should be no significant amount of noise. I would argue that being in such close proximity to the busy A340 and the heavy goods lorries trundling by certainly does constitute a significant amount of noise and therefore lead to a stressful environment for any cats. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate your timing. Perfect.
I've been practicing.
I can tell. Members, questions for Mrs. Howe? Councillor Tucker.
Your garage isn't even shown on the map, is it?
Councillor Tucker, could I ask you to address the microphone, please? Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. It is on the location map. If you look to page 21 and 22 of my submission on Google Earth.
We don't have access to your submission. We only have access to the planning document and the report.
There's the garage. You can see it on the picture. Yeah, it's an old, the other one is an old block plan, obviously. Oh.
I just wanted to make sure that everybody realised how close that is, because the new cattery will be literally right up beside the garage, won't it?
Well, yes.
And so,
and the other end of it within 7 feet of the kitchen, that's the bedroom window that you can see there, and it goes, the pens go right to the extreme of the back. It's an L shape the pens would be in, and the nearest point is 7 feet from our house wall, which is the kitchen.
I don't know whether you go front first into your garage or back, but
Always drive in front. We've ample space in the front garden to manoeuvre the cars. We drive into the garage, we reverse out of the garage, we drive back onto the road. Yeah.
Any other questions? Councillor Richards.
Thank you. Mrs. Hale, do you yourself have any animals, cats or dogs?
We don't have any, but I have in the past. I'm not a cat hater. I really like cats. There's nothing, I don't object per se. It's just the proximity. The whole site, in my opinion, is totally unsuitable for a business of that nature, any business really. It's a really small plot. I don't know if have you had a site meeting? Did you? Yes. You've seen the extent of the plot and the amount of traffic that's going to be generated trying to manoeuvre given the existence of the pens. My son used to have a cat until unfortunately it had to be put down, and when they went away we used to look after the cat. It was a house cat, no problem at all. So I don't have a problem with cats. I do have a problem with up to 50 cats being 7 feet from my kitchen window.
Any more questions? No? Thank you, Mrs. Hale. Ms. Davis and Ms. Ayres, please. Good evening and welcome to the committee. You have 4 minutes between you. I'll leave it to you to split, and the button on the silver button at the bottom.
Okay, my name is Tracy Davis and myself and Janet Ayres are the applicants of this planning application. We are proposing to provide a service for cat owners who require short-term care and accommodation for their cats. Typically, the average stay would be 10 days, however, clients may wish to leave their cats for longer periods. We will only accept fully vaccinated and neutered cats. The cattery building itself will be situated on our land adjacent to our property where 4 buildings currently reside in a derelict state of repair. The land currently serves no purpose, and prior to us moving in, it was used for car maintenance, quad bikes, etc. The buildings are an eyesore, and we believe that our plans will not only serve a purpose, but would also be a visual improvement to the site. The design and sustainable structure will complement the current surroundings and will not cause harm or impact on the environment in any way. The design will make the most efficient use of the land and will not overlook or shadow our neighbouring properties. The cattery roof would be the only visual part that both neighbouring properties would see, and this would stand no higher than the existing derelict buildings. We propose to plant shrubs and bushes to offer further screening. The cattery will operate on a strict appointment-only basis. We propose to operate with the opening hours of 9:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. No visitors will be permitted on Sundays or bank holidays. The entrance and exit from our property has good visibility from both directions. We will allocate 2 parking spaces for the sole use of the cattery, and there will be ample turning space to enable cars to exit the property in a forward-facing position. Vehicular activity will be low due to appointments being arranged. 1 car would stop for a maximum of 15 minutes at a time, and we will not allow more than 2 customers to arrive at any one time. The nature of this activity will be low-key, and the cats will not be allowed outside the building. Therefore, there will be no impact upon the local ecology. Cats are very quiet animals and are quick to adapt to their current surroundings. The materials used for the building will be effective in noise reduction. Cats are very clean animals, and we will have meticulous cleaning standards. Each pen will be sanitised in between boarders and on a daily basis. Therefore, this regime will not allow odours to form. We will install low-level lighting and heating, and we will inquire about solar energy to reduce the impact on the environment. The waste will be stored in a separate bin away from the general household waste at the front of our property, and will be collected by a commercial waste carrier on a regular basis. The cattery will be staffed by myself and Janet Ayres, therefore we will not need additional staff. We have spoken to local veterinary surgeries regarding our plans, and they are happy to offer support. We fully understand that we will need to obtain an animal boarding licence from the council before we can operate the cattery. We have researched catteries within the Basingstoke area, and the Gracemere cattery along the Harroway did close last year. With the increasing popularity of pets and more owners taking holidays, as a whole there is a shortage of well-constructed and properly run boarding catteries.
You have 1 minute.
We currently travel between us 92 miles per day to our places of work, and this causes more impact on the environment than our proposal to open a cattery. We conclude that taking all these factors into consideration, this proposal should be granted planning permission. This would result in bringing a small business to the area that will offer facilities and support for the local community.
Thank you very much. If you'd just put your microphone off, please. Thank you. Right, members, questions to the applicant? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Can you tell me from the back of the actual cattery to your boundary fence along the 2 sides that it borders, can you tell me what the space is between the back of the new building and the fence?
We're looking to propose to leave around about 3 feet to a metre to enable us access to be able to maintain the back of the property of the cattery, and also to plant some small bushes and trees.
Any more questions, members? Councillor Stucker.
I'm not sure really whether I should ask you or whether our officers, but in the plans, what I don't understand is, in one plan you've got them absolutely like that, and the other one it goes at an angle, which I don't understand. Does the fence make you do it like that, or you wouldn't want to build it like that?
Originally, when we submitted the plans, we were asked to put it on as along the fence line as we were proposed to have it. At 4:20 today, we were told that we had a phone call to say, can you amend your plans so that they are in a 90-degree angle, as opposed to going along the fence line. So we actually had about 10 minutes to do that before we had to leave to come here. So we drew them on. We weren't asked to put them in
to scale,
so we didn't do it to scale. And then we received an email back to say that they need to be to scale.
But the actual fence line itself
not
isn't straight, which is hence why we originally drew it on and in the line of the fence, because it isn't 90 degrees. There is an angle on one side.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Thank you very much, ladies. Questions to officers? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. Firstly, why the change of the building to a 90 degree when the boundary of the plot is quite obviously not 90 degrees? Why is the building not following the fence line? Because that will leave a rather wasted triangular space behind it. And secondly, have you got any measurements from the boundary to the neighbouring property's building? Because we've been given a distance of 7 feet from the actual cattery to the neighbour's house, and if 3 feet of that is within the boundary of Cobb Cottage, the indication from the plans, and obviously it's very difficult to scale, is that I can't see how the lady arrives at that 7 feet. It looks more like 12 on the plan. I'd like to know exactly where we are with that.
My colleagues behind me are just going to do the measurement, but in terms of the difference between the building and the plan, if you look at page 139 of your papers, what has been submitted and requested for planning permission is an L-shaped building. Page 138 of the papers show that what's been submitted shows more of a V, a larger angular gap. And so what the clarification was asked today was to make the plan on 138 accurate to reflect the building that was being applied for on page 139, because we assumed that the building plan was accurate because it's to scale and dimensioned and very clearly drawn. So we asked for a correction for 138.
And to make it clear for members, when we discuss whether we approve or otherwise this particular application, we are to look at page 139, and that will be the shape of the cattery that is the subject of this application, not the indicative drawing on page 138.
In the introduction, it's where maybe you missed it in the update, I was saying that we're proposing an additional condition that amended condition 1, which starts on page 133, to remove reference to the block plan and the parking plan, to ask for a new site plan that was accurate, that accurately plotted the building shown on page 139, and also took in the requirements of draft proposed conditions 8 and 9 on page 135, which is in relation to waste storage and car parking, turning and manoeuvring.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. If it's going to be right angle, I mean, which bit of it is going to... presumably one bit of the building will follow the one bit of the fence line. Which bit is not going to follow the fence line then?
Well, we have assumed that the 60, if you look at the larger shape of the L, the 17.126 elevation on page 139 would match the boundary with Bow Brook on the plan on 138, so that with a 90-degree bend, that would pull it away from the field to the rear.
So towards
Cobb Cottage, yeah.
I've got a question for officers. I'm just thinking that there was, in the update, there's a letter of objection that states vehicles, or the second bullet, won't be able to leave the site where written in the A33. Now, I seem to recall condition 9. If this is approved, would condition 9 be, how can I put it, not expanded, but more explicit about vehicles entering and leaving the site in a forward gear?
We could put after the word turning, so development shall not commence until details for the turning, open brackets, enter and leave in a forward gear, close brackets, manoeuvring and parking of vehicles within the curtilage, and that would make it explicit that that turning required leaving and entering in a forward gear.
Would the committee go along with that kind of wording in condition 9? So it's crystal clear that you don't reverse onto the A340, which is what the objectors were anticipating somebody to do who might be slightly deranged, because I wouldn't do it. Is the committee happy with that? Yep. Thank you. Any more questions to officers? Councillor Richards.
The applicant mentioned, and I know you have to get a special licence for boarding kennels or cattery. I should probably know this, but who in the local authority does that?
We have a licensing team that would give, I think they give kennels, dogs, taxis, can't think of, no, environmental health, sorry. So they do cats and dogs licenses.
Right, in issuing a licence to such a property as this, I mean, obviously they have to be assured that the things like the ventilation, lighting and all this sort of stuff is up to the requirements as stated in the legislation for catteries and kennels. So it can't be our ordinary licensing committee to do that. So someone else, I guess, is going to have to check that out, like a veterinary surgeon or something. I mean, I'm just wondering who is actually aware of the conditions, because there's no detail in this plan as to ventilation, lighting, and these sort of aspects of keeping animals. Thank you.
Well, that would be for the licensing committee. I was looking at our legal advisor there because they have committees as well. But I imagine it's a bit like building control. We can give planning permission for a new dwelling, but we're not looking at the foundations, the thermal insulation, the safe structure, the windows, the waste pipe, how it connects to the sewers. But we can still give permission for the dwelling. If the applicant then can't get building regulations approval, then they can't build their building.
Any more questions for officers? I'm sorry? Yeah, if you have a contribution, Wendy, absolutely. Councillor Richards. Councillor Richards? The legal advisor will answer some of your question for you.
Yes, Councillor. In respect of animal boarding establishment, there's an Animal Boarding Establishment Act of 1963 under which the local authority, and it will be the environmental health team, grant a licence for the boarding of cats or dogs, and that will be subject to various conditions. It won't necessarily come before any licensing committee, as in the licensing committee we have. It will be a delegated officer function, if that helps.
Yep, thank you very much for that. Any more questions for the officers? Any debate, please? Councillor.
I'd actually like the answer to the question I asked the officers earlier about the distances to the neighbour's cottage.
That plan isn't to scale, so my colleagues behind haven't been able to scale it off accurately. That's why we've asked for an amended plan that is to scale, that shows it accurately.
Right, no more questions? Any debate? I'm going to kick off this one. It's going back to the same subject. The applicant had actually put some stakes in the ground when we viewed the site of where the corner of the cattery was going to be. Now, all I can do is take it that was an accurate position. And I stood in that position and I deliberately looked around at the adjacent house. And I have to agree with Councillor Robinson, I was having a great well, I estimated from my own eyesight, how far away. And I'm sorry, it's more than 7 feet from that particular point on the corner of the planned cattery. So this is why we do a site visit, is to get a physical viewing of how this thing is going to sit in the site. I also think there's more than adequate room on the other side of that fence that you can see in the photograph for vehicles to turn, especially with the infrequency of, and only 2 vehicles, extra vehicles on the site. So it's a difficult one, this, because you can't estimate noise. And I did note, though, that the applicant did mention that the cats were neutered. Now, my very brief experience with cats is that non-neutered cats tend to be noisy, especially when you get tomcats and females, even not in close proximity, but in the same environment, and that can really be noisy. But once they're neutered, they tend to be very quiet, or certainly not less. They tend to be quiet. So I'm satisfied, in my own particular mind, that the objections have been answered. But I'd be glad to hear of any other members' comments. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about this distance that we don't have a measurement for. And the other thing that really concerns me, whilst I appreciate that the plans need to be accurate and consistent, turning this category into a 90-degree option actually reduces the parking, reduces the turning area. So we've made the plans accurate, but we've finished up with a worse form of development than the somewhat open V. So I would actually like to defer this and get these issues sorted and get the accurate measurements and see the application amended to an open V configuration, so it does follow the fence line and it does give the maximum amount of parking. So I would actually move for a deferment whilst we get all these issues sorted.
Officer's comment.
Yes, you don't need to vote on that, do you? So yeah, if you could defer, so you could defer it for an accurate site plan because it's a condition, and if members consider that they aren't comfortable leaving it for a condition because you don't feel that you can establish the principle is acceptable at this stage, then that's fine. We can ask for the accurate site plan and the parking to be turning and manoeuvring to be shown on that plan and bring it back to committee with the accurate site plan and the distance that Councillor Robinson was interested in.
Councillor Robinson, are you moving for a deferment on that basis?
Yeah, I move for a deferment.
Councillor Bound?
I'll second it.
All those in favour for Councillor Mrs Tucker, you're the ward councillor. Do you have a comment?
Surprise, surprise. Yes, I do. I would absolutely agree with it that we do defer it, and also I'd like it showing exactly the distance from the fence to the back of the actual cattery, because I find there's an awful lot of doubt there in my mind as to what it actually will be on the ground.
It's been formally moved and seconded for a deferment for the production of scaled and measured diagrams. Is that the wording?
We would say deferred for an accurate site plan to a scale that clearly shows the distance from the boundary that you can see there to the back of the building, the parking and the turning and manoeuvring space to enter and leave in a forward gear. So that would be at a scale, I would suggest, much larger scale than that demonstrated on page 138, because you can't read the distance between the boundary and the building.
Could I add something to that, and also the distance to the adjoining property? I'm not quite sure how we identify this Bowbrook house. So the questions of that estimate is now an accurate measurement, both from the fence and from the cattery itself. On that basis, members, moving for deferment, all those in favour? Any against? None against. Thank you. That's carried. Officers?
To confirm that the application has been deferred from this evening's meeting to allow the receipt of an amended plan that accurately shows the building on the site and the relationship with the boundary, the parking and the turning and manoeuvring space, and the relationship with Bowbrook Cottage adjacent. And the shape of the building, confirming whether it's L-shaped or a larger open V.
Thank you. Move on to item 4, Yew Tree Cottage. Officers?
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the erection of a single-storey extension to the southern elevation, a two-storey extension to the eastern elevation, creation of a bay window, which has now been changed to, a standard window, new vehicular access and a detached garage. The update paper highlights the receipt of amended plans and comments from the Conservation, Tree and Highway departments, all raising no objection subject to conditions other than conservation, and the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you. May I ask Mrs. Locke to come forward, please? Good evening, Mrs. Locke. And not quite like Mastermind, but the microphone button's on the bottom there. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My objection relates solely to the location of the proposed new driveway and its implications for highway safety, the detriment to me, and the options for an alternative driveway access. Yew Tree Cottage and my property, Mill View, are in the centre of Etchingswell village, between the pub and the village school. The roads are narrow, with hedges, grass verges and ditches. There is difficulty accessing my property due to site restrictions, as it is situated on the bend of the road. My predecessors had difficulty obtaining planning permission due to these site restrictions, but were eventually granted planning in 1989 as no other access was available. The planned additional driveway access for Yew Tree Cottage is directly adjacent to my access, and this is currently a grass verge. Etchingswell is often used as a cut-through from the A34 and the A339, and traffic increases when there are problems on these A roads, and the sat-nav takes people through the village. Over the years, the number of delivery vans has increased, and many people take no notice of the 30 miles per hour limit. Farm traffic, school buses and large vehicles cannot access the village via any other route other than past our properties due to the width restriction of the bridge. All of this adds to the difficulty for access and consequently highway safety. I asked for the additional new access to be situated on the south side of the telegraph pole. This would remove the need to alter one of the struts holding the telegraph pole and the planned resiting of the road restriction sign. Although the access has already moved from what was originally planned, which was directly across the access to my property, the distance is such that my concerns remain. In respect of the siting of the new garage and access, Yew Tree Cottage has good-sized grounds, and there are other options available, including putting the garage where the current outbuildings are, which is still away from the trees. The plans show the proposed access gates at being 3 metres each gate, which I am told is incorrect, and it should be a total of 3.5 metres width access, and I would like this confirmed as the plans currently show an access of 18 feet wide. The plans show the sight lines of the proposed access. I was told by a member of the planning department that a highways officer would comment on the highway aspects, and I asked for the highways officer to also consider the impact this adjacent new access will have on vehicle access to my property, my sight lines, and consequently highway safety, all of which were a concern when Mill View was built, still is a concern, and which, with the proposed access, I can only see will increase the difficulties already experienced.
You have just over half a minute.
In conclusion, I ask for this proposed access to be rejected and new plans to be submitted, taking into consideration my sight lines, highway safety, the detriment to me and other options that are available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you'd like, yes, thank you. Good on the microphone. Members, questions to Mrs. Hill? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. You say that the new access will cross your access. Do you own that access, or is that part of the highway property?
It seems from the plans that I don't own it, although I've always assumed it was mine. It was tarmacked by my predecessor. I don't believe it's owned by the highways officer. I've always maintained it. And my predecessor lived there for over 100 years, and they always maintained it.
Thank you. Any more questions to Mrs. Locke? Thank you very much. Can I ask Mrs. Selston and Mr. Taylor to come forward, please? Good evening. And the button on the bottom of that microphone is all yours for 4 minutes. But there's 4 minutes between you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak at your meeting. Please excuse me from reading from my notes, but it'll avoid me rumbling on. Firstly, we're delighted to be living in Etchinswell, and we're keen to do everything that we can to ensure that our proposals fit into the village. We're also keen to be good neighbours, discuss any areas of concern and find solutions. We welcome the fact that the planner's report summarises the issues well and recognises that we're doing what we can to ensure that our proposals meet all the needs associated with planning regulations. We'd also like to make 2 further points. Firstly, that one of the significant benefits of the proposed new parking area is that it will remove the need to use the difficult and potentially unsafe access from our current parking area. We currently have to pull out of our existing driveway across most of the width of the road before we can actually see what's coming from the northerly direction. Secondly, that the Parish Council on the 11th of October withdrew all of their objections. We've had conversations with all of those living close to our property. Most are fully supportive of our proposals. We're aware that our neighbour of Millview is not happy about our new proposed driveway, and we've tried to compromise where possible and mitigate against her concerns. We met with Councillor Isett on site, and at his suggestion we've moved the proposed driveway southwards. With regard to the safety of families walking to and from school, we recognise that families use the drive of Millview as a refuge from passing traffic, and we're pleased that our proposed new driveway will offer an additional refuge and one which has good visibility of traffic in both directions. We're also mindful of concerns that our proposed new driveway could increase the risk of flooding, but the culvert under the proposed new driveway has been sized to ensure that the flood risk will not be increased by the new driveway. Having looked at lots of other drainage ditches and culverts around the village, we recognise how they can become clogged with dead leaves and silt, so we would undertake to inspect the culvert regularly and keep it clear of any debris. These are the main points that we wish to make, other than reiterating that we're keen that our proposals fit in with the village of Etchinswell and that we're good neighbours to all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions to the applicant? Nope. Thank you very much. And members, questions to officers? Councillor Richards.
I mean, I see here the main thing here is the entrance. Sorry, thank you, Chair. The main interest here is in the access and the entrance. I just wondered if our highways officer had anything to say on this, and thinking really with regard to safety, schools and that sort of thing, school children.
I think from the highway perspective, the key element is that the new access is provided to a suitable standard, including the piping of the ditch, etc. So certainly making sure that the full details of that are covered by an appropriate condition will be key. However, having visited the site myself today, it is the case that the existing access is very tight and has very limited visibility due to the high hedge. Therefore, given that this additional access will still serve the same property, its geometry, visibility, etc. is favourable to what currently exists, and therefore, on balance, is probably a better arrangement than what currently exists.
Anything else? Anything else, members, for the officers? Nope. Debate? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at this, we've heard from the traffic officer saying that he considers the access to be better. There's no increase in the traffic generated by the property, so that is an improvement. And I think the chances of two dwellings clashing on the driveway, when we're looking at an average of 7 car movements per day per property, I think the chances of them both coming out their drive at the same time or going into their drives at the same time are going to be very, very infrequent. So on that basis, I can't see any problems with this. There's no objections to the extension, so I recommend it for approval.
Councillor Mr Tucker, you're seconding this? Thank you very much. Been proposed and seconded for approval. All those in favour? That's approved, officers.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is recommended for approval subject to no further representations being received raising new material issues at the end of the notice period, which is on page 140 of the agenda, and subject to a highways condition to secure full details of the means of access, including the crossing over the ditch and inward opening and setback of any gates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 5. And if you'd like to present this, and could Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins please come forward? And if you'd just like to take just Mr. Jenkins, I assume. If you'd just like to take a seat while the officer presents the agenda item.
This is a planning application for the demolition of existing side and rear extensions and erection of a front and rear extensions and raising of the roof to create a first floor of the existing property at 2 Hatch Lane, and the erection of 2 numbered 4-bedroom dwellings and the creation of a new access on land adjacent to it or part of its garden. There is an update on page 5 of your update papers. The flood risk assessment was received and has resulted in an additional condition. Conservation comments have now been received and they're on the update papers. And as a result of those, additional tree conditions are recommended. And members visited the site with the meeting last week, and it's just to clarify that the existing dwelling that's being amended will maintain its existing access off Hatch Lane, and the proposed new dwellings will share an access off Byfleet Avenue.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Jenkins, you have 4 minutes. That one button you see there.
Great. Good evening, everybody. My wife and I are the owners of 2 Hatch Lane, the neighbouring property to the proposed development. Of primary importance to us, and number 2, is the upper storey window on the north-easterly elevation of the bungalow. We will already be experiencing a loss of privacy through the creation of the upper storey rear dormer windows, and I'd like to clarify that the existing upper storey rear window of the bungalow cannot see into our garden due to the existing roof apex. This privacy loss in some degree is understandable, but we feel that the new upper northeasterly bathroom window is too much of a loss of privacy and impact on our daily life, even with the recommendations made of the obscured glass and restricted opening. It's not simply that we object to being overlooked or the loss of light and views of the trees. We will be impacted by bathroom lighting into our bedrooms, and we feel strongly that we do not wish to be able to see people in their bathroom, even through obscured glass. Ourselves and neighbours do not have windows in the northeasterly elevation, and none of us, as far as I'm aware, have upper storey windows facing each other. I'd also like to address reason 2 for approval. The site plan dated 23rd of October shows 3 parking spaces at the rear of plot 2, in addition to the turning area at the rear of plots 1 and 2. This means that the plot does not have a private rear garden, which is, in our view, entirely out of character with the surrounding houses. This is not, in our opinion, keeping with the plot design and street pattern along Hatch Lane. Parking spaces in this position are behind the rear building line of Hatch Lane, out of keeping with the character of the area. Light pollution is of concern to us also, and we'd like the consideration to be given to suitable lighting, both in terms of light level and duration in these rear areas. Regarding the Byfleet entrance, I believe there's been a number of submissions regarding this. The line of sight is good when the road is quiet. However, during the term time, good 45 minutes twice a day, there is solid parked cars going up Byfleet, plus substantial foot traffic along pavements in both directions, meaning that the sight line mentioned is severely compromised. This heavy road and foot traffic during these times increases the workload on drivers using the road, especially those turning from Hatch Lane into Byfleet and having to accelerate due to the incline from the Five-Ways Junction. Introducing a new factor of cars exiting from this property only serves to increase this driving complexity. And finally, there's a lot mentioned of site cleanliness and delivery time windows on the submissions, not to mention, but there's no mention, sorry, of the project duration. It is of course concern to us, all of us living alongside, how long the development might be in terms of the noise and disruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, any questions, please, for Mr. Jenkins? None at this stage. Thank you very much. Mr. Stratton, please. Good evening, Mr. Stratton. You have 4 minutes. The microphone button is that silver one on the base of the planet there. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this proposal. Detailed consultation has taken place for the last 12 months with the council to arrive at this proposal. Following recommendations from the planning officer, the proposed new dwellings were substantially reduced in bulk and height, and also now include the proposed existing bungalow extension. Numerous provisions have taken place and all recommendations accommodated, including the removal of both double garages. The new proposal would now fit in with the street scene and neighbouring properties. The question of levels was raised at the viewing visit. I understand that a condition could be included to provide a site survey and ground level details prior to the commencement of any works. The new access from Byfleet Avenue would appear to be the obvious choice, as it is wider than Hatch Lane and also provides footpaths and verges on both sides. Highways requested a survey which was commissioned. This information set visibility displays that easily avoid street furniture, which is post box, etc., and are contained within the double yellow parking line restrictions. The report also states that there have been no collisions at the frontage for the previous 5 years, in fact since 2011. Concern was expressed about parents crossing with children. The fact that the new entrance has the benefit of double yellow lines means that no vehicles can park close to the junction, therefore making both visibility and crossing safer. A biodiversity survey was carried out, no bats were found. Concerns have been raised regarding the relationship of 2A with the neighbouring property number 2. It should be noted that considerable extensions have been carried out at number 2, especially to the rear. The proposals for 2A do not extend as far back as those on number 2. There will be no loss of privacy to number 2, as the only window proposed to the side is a bathroom window with obscure glass. There is a gap which is a distance of 5.5 metres between the properties. Planning guidance states that separation distances to the front and rear only of 20 metres. This proposal achieves 35 to the front and 25 to the rear. The principle of this development is established. Garden sizes are well in excess of the recommended. It complies with all aspects of the highways and biodiversity officers' requirements. and also the landscape and environmental health officers. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for being within the time.
Thank you.
Members, could you put your microphone off, please? What you do is you mute out everybody else on the table, not mine. Questions, and it's Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. You did mention that at the viewing panel comments had been made, or it had been noted, the degree to which the land rises from Hatch Lane up into the garden of 2A, and to some extent also along the Byfleet, or the start of Byfleet Avenue. I mean, and I know the parish council, amongst others and locals as well, sort of rather concerned about the visual impact on the longer skyline of a conservation area. I mean, would you be willing to consider, as you appear to have partially mentioned, consider reducing the level of the site in order to bring the skyline down, bring the houses down a bit? Thank you.
Yes, as I had stated, I mean, it could be a condition that we included to provide a site survey that was acceptable to the council for the sight lines there.
So I take it that so you would be willing, for, to provide such a survey for the council, and accept that an approval or otherwise to some extent depend on what the council feel about the survey that you've produced. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm just going to quickly glance over to the officers. I believe we have condition 20 on this application.
Yeah, we have condition 20 that asks for a site survey to be produced not less than 1 to 500 to a nearby datum point. If members are explicitly asking that the levels be lowered, as opposed, because when you've got a level site you can either build up from the site or you can cut down into the site, we could amend the word, if you delegate to officers, to amend that condition to make it clear councillors' intentions that they would like the site section to show the buildings built low into the site and the site not made up to build up there. So we could amend that to reflect that wish.
I will ask councillors, do we agree to that kind of wording in condition 20? I know we're sort of jumping around a bit here, but as we have the applicant here, and he's agreed to this, then if I could direct the officers to accept that wording.
Yeah, I've just made a note to say that amend this condition to require the site to be cut in with the levels and the finished floor levels cut into the site, as opposed to the finished floor levels being built up on the site.
Fine. Councillor Goodison, is there any other question? We'll get. That's fine. Yes, we'll get there. If there's no other questions, Mr. Stratton, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Now, Councillor Goodison, as the ward councillor, it's all yours. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It was a great disappointment to find that the viewing panel decided to go there at half term, thereby completely, to some extent, shooting me in the foot. However, that's as things go. I imagine that quite a number of members of this committee do have schools in their wards, and therefore they will be very familiar with the sort of parking problems that occur at school, delivering and collecting time. So I'd just like to point out a number of facts. Hatch Lane, Byfleet Lane are both rat runs into Basing from the A30 and the M3 into and through Basing Village in towards Daneshill, etc. At the last time the county did a traffic survey, I think the rate of vehicles entering Hatch Lane from the A30 between 7:30 and 9 was something like 1 every 7.5 seconds. Against that, of course, you have the mothers. On the other side of the five-ways traffic lights, which is the junction of Crown Lane, Byfleet and Hatch Lane, you have the two schools within 150 yards of that crossroads. So, of course, between 8:30 and 9, you've got the mums coming in one direction. You've got people rat run trying to get through in another direction. The result is, as I'm sure people here who have schools in their ward will accept, is that you have a traffic and pedestrian and mother movement mayhem for about half an hour between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Cars park although there's a yellow line up going Byfleet across the vehicle entrance for these two houses, the fact of the matter is that in the morning vehicles are parked all the way along there from the traffic lights up to Apple Way. Mothers are walking their children down the pedestrian way towards the school. People are coming back the other way. With so many cars parked there, exiting from 2A is going to be very hazardous for pedestrians, particularly children, because a lot of the mothers have 2 or 3 children. They're walking to school, and they're not. Sometimes one's running slightly ahead, one's running behind, etc., etc. So there is a pedestrian safety issue there at certain times of the day, i.e., school arrival, school collecting times. So I would just suggest that hopefully you will consider whether this is a sensible proposal in view of the danger that there's going to be to pedestrians, and in particular the children who are going to be pedestrians. Collecting time from school is not quite so bad because, of course, the rat run isn't coming into the village. It's only the mums, parking to collect their children. But it is a serious issue. It was not, of course, at all apparent on viewing panel for obvious reasons. There was not a car to be seen, not a pedestrian to be seen, not even a cat to be seen walking along the road. So it was difficult for me to get my point across about how dangerous this road is at a certain time of the day and everything. But anyway, it's up for the committee to consider. Those of you who have schools in your ward will, I'm sure, be able to understand exactly the sort of conditions which prevail there between sort of roughly 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning and round the 3 o'clock collection time. Thank you.
Members, any questions for the ward councillor? No? Right. Questions to officers, please. Anybody? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. There seems to be some concern over the bathroom window overlooking the neighbour's property. I'm talking about the house which is being altered rather than new builds. We've heard that it's already got a specification for frosted glass. Is there, or can we put in a specification regarding restricted opening on that to maintain the privacy of the neighbour?
If you look at condition 16 on page 175, it says all proposed bathrooms, ensuite, WC windows hereby approved shall be obscure glazed and top hung fan light in perpetuity unless otherwise agreed in writing by local planning authority. We could add to that to make it clear to say this relates to both the amended existing house and the new build houses, if you wanted to be absolutely sure and remove any doubt that it... Okay.
Sorry, I have missed it.
Yes, sorry.
Any more questions? Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could just ask the highway officer, did any highway officers happen to visit that particular site during a school run arrival or collection time and was able to identify exactly the sort of problems which were occurring there at that time? Thank you.
So I visited the site this morning, parking on Byfleet Avenue shortly after 8 o'clock. First vehicle I observed parking, which appeared to be dropping off, assisting the child to the school, was 8:25. The last parent's vehicle I saw depart was 4 minutes past 9. Yes, it is the case that that parking extends quite a long length from the finish of the double yellow lines from Five Ways and then extends southwards towards but not up to the junction with Apple Way. In doing so, that on-street parking does cross other existing accesses for existing properties located to the south, and the pavement on the development side did seem to be the more heavily used. However, from a highway perspective, I think the situation is predictable, and it is, I would have thought, for vehicles leaving these new properties, that it would be very clear that should they be choosing to exit at that time, there are the school dropping off activities, and their access will benefit from having the parking controls going across it. And I also considered the visibility to the right towards Five Ways Junction to be reasonable. To the left on exit, there will be interactions with cars that are parked on street. There will be a slight reduction in visibility in that direction when it is parked up, but that is equally true, if not worse, for the existing dwellings located to the south. So on balance, I still consider the proposal to be reasonable with respect to its access onto Byfleet Avenue.
Okay. Any other questions to officers, please? There are none. Okay, move to debate. Nothing? Okay. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. This site obviously is a huge site. I've driven past it many times. It's just crying out to be developed. And I think the fact that the existing dwelling continues exiting onto Hatch Lane and the two new dwellings exit onto Byfleet Avenue represents a very, very small increase in the traffic in that area. We've already dealt with the other objection, which was the height of the building sitting in the landscape with the view to the park. So to my mind, it's an acceptable application. So I recommend we approve it.
Second, Councillor Mrs. Tucker. It's been properly moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour? Thank you. That is approved. Officers, on conditions? I do beg your pardon. One against.
The application is approved, subject to the additional conditions in the update papers and the amendment to condition 20 on the main papers to have the cut-in, and the reason for that amendment is for the visual amenity of the area, and the clarification of condition 16 to make it clear that the obscure glazing is for the bathrooms proposed in both the existing building and the proposed new buildings.
Thank you for that. Move on to item number 6. Granta Carus, officers.
Thank you, Chair. This application is an amended scheme for the erection of a detached dwelling, garage and associated works following the demolition of the existing commercial buildings, removal of hard standing and storage use on the site. It would now include a vaulted sunroom, a single-storey extension. There's no update on this application and it's recommended for approval subject to conditions.
I have no speakers to this, so I'll go straight to questions for officers. Councillor McCormack.
I had one. It's a thing of mine that when we have applications like this, in this case on the disused Basingstoke Norton Light Railway, the railway was built as a permanent way, but this was probably one of the least permanent railways in Britain. It closed in 1930 and is not likely to open again. But once you build on the alignment, there's no going back. So do we have any options in terms of conditions to make sure that the alignment, if a need arises for it to be used for something, it can still be used for something? May not be a railway in this case, but it might be a cycle path or something like that.
Thank you, Councillor. There wouldn't be a facility for us to condition if an alternative use or access is needed on the site to allow that. There is an extant permission on the site, so this is an amendment to one granted in March, the 16 reference on page 189. So the applicant has 3 years from that date to build that out, and that wasn't felt to be reasonable or necessary to condition that if there is an alternative requirement on the site for cycle paths or railway accesses, that you could include that at all.
I don't expect an answer for this tonight, but perhaps it could be incumbent on the relevant people in the council to look at a policy that might protect similar applications in future. The case that brings to mind is the Basingstoke Canal, where the alignment was built on near Old Basing, and any subsequent attempts to do anything with the canal have been thwarted because we built on the alignment. So I think there is some special considerations that needs to be done here, and I'm sure that other local authorities have had similar experiences, and in some cases may have policies that protect these things.
Thank you. I'm going to follow that up because I've got a question on exactly the same lines, dare I say it. No, because I used to rely on trains, steam trains, when I first went to school. Now, the disused lines, or disused ones that were torn up after beaching, I suppose it's a question of ownership. Did they automatically have some form of right-of-way attached to them? I don't know the answer to the question, because it could be, and I agree with Councillor McCormack, an understanding for members of DC now and in the future that we have an understanding of whether there is or not, and how maybe other local planning authorities have handled it, or there might be a national policy. I have absolutely no idea. But could I just park that and ask the question, please? And maybe we could have a better understanding for the future. And I'll go along with what Councillor McCormack said. Not only railways, you know, I think the canals are a very good other example of the same kind of thing. Thank you. Any more questions to officers? Any debate on this particular site? I know we visited it at one stage. It was on the viewing panel earlier this year. No? Councillor Mrs. Tucker moves the recommendation for approval, seconded by Councillor Mrs. Court. All those in favour? Any against? One against. Thank you. That's approved, officers.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is approved subject to the conditions in the main report.
Thank you. Moving on, item number 7, Knights Farm. And I'm going to ask Justin Packman to come forward, please. Good evening, Mr. Packman. If you'd just like to sit there for a second while the officers present this application.
This is a planning application for the demolition of existing B8 buildings and the erection of 4-number live-work dwellings, the creation of a new access and alteration of an existing access to Knights Lane, a land swap involving a change of use of agricultural land to residential, commercial land to agricultural, and commercial land to residential, and associated landscaping. There is a small update on page 7 of your update papers, just confirmation that the scoping officer has confirmed that there are no identified contributions required for this planning application, and some amendments to conditions that were on the printed paper.
Mr. Pacman, good evening. Microphone's in front of you, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. In May 2016, a resolution to grant planning permission was given by this committee for the redevelopment of this site for 6 dwellings designed to reflect a traditional farm courtyard. The permission was issued in September 2016 following completion of a legal agreement. The permission remains extant and capable of implementation. The approved scheme provided 3 family homes of 4 and 5 bedrooms, each with an element of B1 workspace. The scheme also provided 3 2-bedroom units of 70 square metres each, which were designed to comply with the local plan housing mix requirement in place at that time. The character of Ball Hill is typically detached family homes of 3+ bedrooms set in reasonable plots. Whilst the previous scheme was policy compliant, concerns were raised by a prospective house builder that the 2-bed units would be too small to be viable in this location. The commercial advice received has led to the revised proposal in front of you this evening. This application seeks permission for 4 detached homes, a reduction in 2 units from the previous scheme. This equates to a 260 square metre reduction in residential floor space from the previously approved scheme. The scheme proposes 1 3-bed, 2 4-bed and 1 5-bed houses. Your officer recognises that the proposed mix is reflective of Guideline 90 of the Village Design Statement and is more reflective of the character of Knights Lane and the Ball Hill area generally. Separate attached workspaces are proposed to enable working from home opportunities, but it is not intended that the office spaces will be used for intensive commercial activities, and in any event, the size of the space will limit their use. As before, in considering, we consider that the proposals would represent a noticeable visual enhancement to the area due to the removal of the existing unattractive buildings and the erection of high-quality new homes compatible with the rural environment. The site is previously developed brownfield land and is therefore supported by the framework and also policy SS6A of the local plan. The proposed development would remove an unrestricted BH use from a residential area, therefore removing the potential for HGVs and vans associated with the site to regularly use the lane, thereby reducing potential for noise and disturbance to local residents. The type of vehicle movements associated with this proposal will be more compatible with Knights Lane and reduced in comparison to the permitted scheme by virtue of the reduced number of units. The application before you this evening is very similar in nature to the scheme that was previously approved by the committee, but is now slightly reduced in overall size and represents a better fit in terms of the character of the area. We therefore hope that you will endorse your officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pacman. If you switch your microphone off, please. Members, any questions for Mr. Pacman? Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Live work units with, I think you said a B1 use. Can you give me some idea of what sort of use you envisage them being put to?
That type of use is quite often, for instance, someone like myself who perhaps might want to start out a small consultancy business, something along those lines where you require just a bit of office space at home where you're able to do perhaps word processing type work or work over the internet, video conferencing, small scale self-starters, often popular with professionals and sometimes in quite high demand.
Any more questions, members? Nope. Thank you, Mr. Pacman. We have no other speakers, so it's questions to officers, please, members, on this application. Nope. Councillor Richards.
Small detail that I noted when I was reading through the papers, page 208. Second paragraph reads, number of residential units proposed has been reduced from 4 to 6. It's a funny way to reduce. Sorry.
Well spotted. Yes, well spotted. I'll move it from the chair for approval. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Mrs. Tucker. All those in favour? Thank you. That's approved, officers.
That's approved as per the main papers and the amended conditions on page 8 of the update papers.
Thank you. Could I ask Wendy Gavin to come forward, please? Good evening, Wendy, and if you'd just like to hang on for a minute, we'll present the application. Yes, please introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. This application is at 4 Pardown in Oakley, and it is for the demolition of the existing dwelling on the site and erection of 4 detached dwellings, new vehicular access, parking areas, amenity space and landscaping. The update paper highlights that there has been an amended plan received to illustrate changes to the highway works and removal of the proposed bollards on the site. The application has also got some amended conditions on the update paper on page 9, and some additional representations have been received which are addressed on pages 10 and 11. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, and you have 4 minutes.
Good evening. The Parish Council is keen to see this site developed, but we have objected to this application primarily due to the overdevelopment of the site and the design of the proposed buildings. There are currently 23 objections on the planning website which stress the fact that the site would be too dense and overdeveloped with 4 four-bedroomed houses, and that the design of these houses is not in keeping with the area, the village design statement and the neighbourhood plan, nor is the design in line with policy CN3 of the adopted local plan. And as an aside, the brick and timber building referred to in the application paperwork is actually a barn that is now used as a garage and workshop. The village design statement says that a diversity of styles for new buildings is acceptable where they are in broad conformity with the character of the surrounding buildings. This is repeated in the neighbourhood plan. Grey bricks and black or even natural timber cladding are not in line with this vision. Policy CN3 of the local plan further reinforces that this application is not appropriate to the size and characteristics of the site or to the established character and density of the neighbourhood. The words being used by the objectors are unattractive, blot on the landscape, imposing, too close together, unsightly, more suitable for London docklands, dark, sombre, oppressive and dominant, plus being likened to industrial units or farm buildings. The 3D visualisation is misleading and shows the neighbouring property clay pits as towering over the new buildings. This would not be the case, and the owner confirmed at the site meeting that the overall height of the buildings would be in line with the height of clay pits. Residents in Woodcroft to the rear of the site would be overlooked by vast glass areas, which would result in a loss of privacy. The visual impact of these imposing buildings is also not acceptable to these residents. Even though the application includes substantial road widening, there will still be considerable congestion in the area, particularly during the construction phase. There is no visitor parking on site and also nowhere for delivery lorries to park, so this would probably be on the road, which I'm sure at the site visit you'll see would not work. A further concern of the residents is the disposal of waste and sewage from these properties. The proposal would seem to be to connect to the main drainage system, which will necessitate some sort of pumping facility, as the main drains are uphill from the site. Apart from 2 Pardown, the houses in Pardown all have septic tanks. Many residents also referred to a previous agreed application for 2 detached 4-bedroomed houses and a pair of 3-bedroom semis as being the preferred solution for this site. I think everybody does want this to be this site to be developed, but not with these particular buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And questions for the Parish Council, please? Nope. Thanks, Wendy. Mr. Hedger and Mr. Lovegrove, please. Gentlemen, good evening. And you have 4 minutes between you.
Dear members of the Planning Committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today to support our current application to deliver new homes to the site at 4 Pardown. We acquired this site, I think, near enough 10 years ago now. In this current scheme, we've actually been working with the council for just over 2 years to get to where we are today. We've altered the scheme, we've changed designs, we've looked at highways, we've brought in a qualified highways officer, we've looked at how best to utilise the scheme, we've looked at how to help the road as much as we can to cause less impact, and this is what we've come to where we are today. As I said, it's been a bit of a love-hate relationship for myself because it's been a 10-year process. But we believe this is the perfect scheme for the site. We've worked with all the relevant parties at the council, and obviously they've all recommended it for approval. I run a construction company in London. We deliver high-end houses in West London. And this is what we wanted to deliver here. It's all high quality, using modern techniques, using modern glass, using stuff what modern houses of today should be built with to gain as much natural light as you can into them, and using natural raw materials as well. That's what we want to do.
Thank you. Just a few points on the design. I'm aware there's only a short amount of time, so we'd just like to reinforce a few points that we've been looking at in relation to the design of the properties. In terms of the general layout, the buildings follow the established pattern on the street, with planting to the road, generous green spaces combined with parking to the front and large gardens to the rear. We believe this provides a good mix of semi-communal space to the front of the site where families can mix with a balance of private amenity space. Whilst the vehicle access to the site is from a single point to minimise the number of crossovers onto Pardown, each house has got a separate path and a gate accessing directly onto the road to avoid the feeling that this site is something of a cul-de-sac completely separate from the rest of the road. The detailed design of the building provides for simple gable-ended forms, which reference both the typology of rural buildings, the existing building on the site, and some of the surrounding buildings. Design is, of course, subjective, and a variety of different dwellings along Pardown have no consistent style, but we strongly feel that the dignified barn-like forms of the dwellings and the use of high-quality materials in the form of grey brick and a mixture of oak and black timber will provide well-loved houses that will complement the street. As housing architects, we're passionate about providing high-quality design to new dwellings that avoids the formulaic approach of volume house builders and will provide wonderful places to families to live. We have developed this approach in rural and village settings in South Oxfordshire, which have been warmly received by planners, developers, and the people buying the finished properties.
You have 1 minute.
Finally, we would like to stress that throughout the application process, we've worked with the council's officers and taken careful heed of the advice in the Oakley Village Design Statement.
Just switch, that's it. Members, any questions for the applicants? Nope. Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Robinson, right at the last minute.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit concerned about the width of Pardown Road, particularly during the construction phase, knowing that you've got Baker's Recovery going up and down there 24/7 with some very, very large vehicles. Have you considered, or would you consider, sort of phasing the build so that you could create more on-site parking during the build period?
We'd look into any consideration. I mean, the front of the site is more than capable of taking large goods vehicles. It's only 4 dwellings, so we're not really going to be having lorry after lorry after lorry coming to site to remove materials, to deliver materials. But if we need to phase it, then we'll look at that option.
I think also the one of the suggested conditions was we would have to do a construction management plan, which may include phasing of the development potentially, as one of the things we'd have to satisfy the council with first.
And Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
I wonder if you could explain to me the wood that is going to be included. Excuse my voice. Sometimes when we get these lovely wooden things, they look great when they're first done, and then they go off in colour. Is that what will happen to this, or will it be treated in some way so that it won't?
If I could, there's two types of wood proposed to give some differentiation to the different properties. The black timber will be kept, as most black timber would, can be treated at once every 5 years or so to maintain its colour. The second wood would be a thermo-treated type of wood, which does gently discolour with age, but will go from a sort of warm brown to a browny grey gradually over the years, which is quite an attractive way for wood to gently show its age.
Sound very nice, but I'm not very keen on it when it goes off.
I mean, all I can say to a house owner will have the option of maintaining the wood in its original state, but it is something which a house owner will have sort of some discretion over.
Councillor Richards.
Thank you, Chairman. I wondered how you comment on the Wendy Gavin from the Parish Council mentioned that she thought too many houses, rather overcrowded, overdeveloped that land. I mean, when I'm looking at the distance between each of the four properties, I wonder what that is, and how actually would you reply to the Parish Council when, you know, this, because it does, or can to me look to be a bit overpowering and close together, those properties.
I think the layout is a product of the type of house. They're rather, the development of the house is a rectangular shape, so it's a long, relatively narrow form. The original application, which did have previous officer approval, as we were doing our scheme before this, was for 6 houses, and we were led by the council to look at a 4-house scheme instead that reflected more accurately what was happening on the surrounding areas. I think if you look along the roads here, and especially the development behind, there is a fairly sort of dense network of houses, and we're not atypical of the area. We have done development similar to this, and they are quite comfortable in reality.
Any more questions, members? No. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Right, you're going to have to put up with me for a bit because I have a statement here from the ward councillor, Councillor Diane Taylor, which I'll read for the record and for you to consider. And I quote, "I welcome a reduction in the number of dwellings proposed for this site, which has been derelict for a number of years. Each individual proposed dwelling is of a contemporary design which, if situated in a standalone house on a suitably large site in a different setting, would be acceptable. However, the way in which these almost identical large houses are situated side by side and very close together gives the appearance of a scheme which aims at squeezing as much housing into the site as possible, rather than a scheme which aims to be an attractive addition to this historic part of Oakley. Each house occupies a large percentage of the plot. The rear gardens are small, particularly if compared to other homes in Pardown, and the front areas will be almost entirely taken up with parking. I would like the committee to look at the 3D view of the proposal, which demonstrates the way in which these 4 long houses would appear on this site, and assess whether this is an appropriate perceived quantum of development and one that fits into the spacious and traditional street scene in Pardown. I would suggest that this scheme does not satisfy policy CN3 of our local plan, which requires a mix of market housing, which includes a range of house type and size to address local requirements, is appropriate to the size, location and characteristics of the site, and is appropriate to the established character and density of the neighbourhood." That's the statement by the ward member. We can't comment, we can't ask any questions, so I will move on to questions to officers. Any questions to officers, please, on this application? If you get the 3D first time for the Development Control Committee, 3D images? Okay. Officers will confirm the question about the distances between the buildings. So, thanks, Lord.
So plot 1 and 2 has a distance of 3.2 metres on the side elevations. Plot 2 to 3 is 2.2 metres, and the same between 3 and 4 at 2.2 metres.
That's a bound.
I think the parish councillor mentioned also the distance between the back of the properties and the properties behind, because of the amount of glass that there was there. What is that sort of distance?
Sorry. Thank you, councillor. I believe it's on page 241 under neighbouring amenities that the distance from the proposed dwellings and the dwellings to the rear is 24 metres. So the minimum distance in the SPD suggests 20 metres back to back, and this is in excess of that.
Any more questions to officers? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Overlooking at the back, can you tell me, my recollection is that this plot sits fairly high in the landscape. Is it higher than the properties behind or lower than the properties behind? Or when it's built, will it be higher or lower? Because I believe there was quite a bit of soil to be removed.
Thank you, councillor. So at the moment we don't have the levels information, so that's condition 17 on page 250 of the agenda, is for detailed levels to be provided, but similar to the previous application a few numbers ago, where we could request that it's cut into the site. That could be added into that condition. It's condition number 17 for levels, but we don't have that information to hand. And my colleagues are just trying to find the visualisation plan, but that is an illustration. That's not an accurate, this is how it will look on the site. It's just to give an idea of how they could look.
I'd like to follow that up, because the one thing that's been commented upon is this vast amount of glass that's going to be on that aspect of these buildings overlooking that those houses that are 24 metres away. Would it be automatic? Would it be automatically? Would you take it into account of any overlooking? Because we tend to get this in other applications about you're going to have 4 fairly large houses with a lot of glass overlooking those other properties. Would that be a consideration that once those levels, that level of information is passed to you, going back to the cutting in, could you consider that part of the condition and determine whether any kind of further condition of glass or whatever would have on the overlooking angle?
I would say that it doesn't need to be part of the condition, because if the levels are insufficient, then we would go back to seek alternative levels. So if it was excessively high, we would go back to resolve that. But in terms of the size of the openings, if it's a modest window but it is at head height, then the overlooking is there, whether it's a larger window, a picture window, for example. So I wouldn't say it's the size of the window giving greater overlooking. It would give a wider view, but in urban residential areas there is always oblique views towards the ends of curtilages, and typically people have screening, so it could be fences, it could be trees or shrubbery that would partially block that view as well. So I wouldn't have said that we need to lump that into the condition to do with levels.
Thank you very much. Any more questions to officers? Go to debate. Okay. Here we have our 3D view. And that's, yeah, can we, should be able to. Is that in, oh, is that in? Can you see that one? We just have to imagine that 24 metres behind them, there's other houses. beyond those trees. And it's indicative, as the officer said, it's an indicative view. Illustrative, I believe, is the word. Right, I've had a look at that. Debate. Councillor Court.
I'll kick off if you like. I'm inclined to agree with the ward member. We only saw that part of Pardown, but having known the area for many, many years, if you amble on further down, it does peter out with properties all the way down. And the actual nature of Pardown is an old traditional village lane, and each property is different. And to actually come along here on this site, which can take some very nice properties, to put in these ultra modern and 4 of them side by side, I think is just a bit too much. Going with what the board member said, maybe 1 you could get away with it, but 4, it's just, I think, too much for that lane.
Okay, any other comments? Councillor Robinson.
I really speak in support of what Councillor Taylor has written. I don't like the design. That's a bit subjective, but again, 1 of them, yeah, 2 of them possibly, but 4 so close together, I think it's overdevelopment of the plot, and I am concerned about the overlooking to the rear. We seem to have sorted the traffic issues, but I don't think this is a suitable development for this plot, purely because it's too cramped.
Now, I'm just getting advice from a development manager here, because we've got, on the previous application, that was refused. There's nothing extant, so this is a standalone application, so history doesn't go with us. Any other comments are in debate on this one? What exactly do you want from the ward councillor? Okay. I would suggest that this scheme does not satisfy policy CN3 of our local plan, which requires a mix of market housing which includes a range of housing type and size to address local requirements. Second one is appropriate to the size, location and characteristics of the site, and also is appropriate to the established character and density of the neighbourhood. That was a quote from the statement from the ward member. Councillor Mrs. Court.
Thank you. I'm prepared to move refusal on giving those grounds.
Chair, if I could just clarify in terms of the proposal for refusal, that is both in terms of the scale of development, in terms of overdevelopment, but also the design. And what I understand from what Councillor Court has raised is the combination of those 2 aspects in terms of the impact on the character of the area is the reason for the motion.
It's been moved and seconded for refusal for the reasons mentioned. Go have a vote. All those in favour for refusal on those grounds? Those against? Thank you. That's carried. Passes. And conditions. We go near the conditions. If you have anything to add. Okay.
So the application would be refused on the grounds of the proposed design, scale and layout of the built form on the site being incongruous with the established pattern and character of the area, and the lack of housing mix, I think, because CN3 was mentioned. So it would not integrate with the surrounding character and pattern of the area, and would be detrimental to visual amenity and character. I think those are the parts there. And then contrary to policy EM10 and the neighbourhood plan, because that was mentioned previously as well.
Thank you very much. That concludes the items on the agenda. I would like members to remain, please, because I've got about 10 minutes of your time to give you an offline briefing.